This is a single board computer, or as Motorola calls it, a monoboard microcomputer, which is hilarious, and I think we should start using that instead of SBC. But it has a 68K 16-bit 8 MHz CPU on it, 128K of RAM, 64K of ROM, 2 serial I/O ports, 3 programmable timers, and all of that is just on the P2 connector here. On the P1 connector on the other side, it implements something called the VersaBus. To look at the documentation here, it says VersaBus is characterized by asynchronous bidirectional operation and support of direct memory access, multiprocessor operation, and the full 16 megabyte address range of the M68000 MPU. So as I understand it, there's essentially 2 different buses going on this monoboard microcomputer. There's the internal bus to the 68K, and then there's the VersaBus side of things. And the 68K can become the arbiter of data on the VersaBus. It can control where data is coming from and where it's going to, and vice versa, which makes this thing perfectly suited to become the control processor for something far more complex, like this Floating Point Systems FPS 3000. This is a multiple instruction, multiple data vector processor add-on for a host system. We think that this specific machine was hooked up to a VAX at some point. They had multiple different interface cards that you could slot into it, and the one in this one is a little bit ambiguous. It's definitely a 32-bit thing, but we're not sure which 32-bit system, so saying it's a VAX is really just a bit of a guess here. But the important part is that this thing can pull out 18 megaflops of performance, which is absolutely ludicrous for the mid-1980s, of which I think this thing hails from about 1986 to 1987. And the party piece of this is something called the XP32 processor. This is a 2-board processor, and you can actually put 2 of those in this to bump this thing up to 36 megaflops, which is ridiculous. This one only has a single XP32 populated in it. And if I'm being honest, this is dumb. We should absolutely give up ever trying to get the FPS 3000 here to work. Floating Point Systems has a very interesting history, and I'm not going to get into all of it right now, but if we take a look at just the heavy hitters, they started with the AP120B, which was a vector processor developed in the late 1970s, built almost entirely out of 7400 series logic chips. And it was incredibly fast, pulling off 12 megaflops of performance, which that's ludicrous for the 70s. So it was quite popular, particularly in the medical field and geology, and even NASA had a handful of these things. And we know of quite a few of these still surviving. The Large Scale Systems Museum has 2 of them, and there's a couple in China, and all over the world there's a bunch still out there. Now, Floating Point Systems ultimately needed to do a little bit of cost reduction because the AP120B has about 25 boards in it, and they really wanted to get that down to about 10 boards. So they took a look at some large-scale integration chips like the TRW multipliers, and they came up with a really brilliant design to shrink it down to about 10 boards, and that was the FPS 100. Now, the memory subsystem of the FPS 100 meant that it had to move at a little bit of a slower pace, which meant it only put out 8 megaflops of performance, which is still a ludicrous amount of performance for the early 1980s. And as a result, the FPS 100 was also still quite popular. My good buddy Coley up in the Northeast has an FPS 100 that he's started to bring up and done some pretty interesting things with. There's one over in the UK that we're really excited about, and there's about 2 or 3 more out there that we've found. I have the front panel for one here in a full board set, but I don't have the backplane, which is a wire-wrapped nightmare, and we've been working on designing a new one, but I'm not super confident in the design, and that's a whole diatribe for a different day. But after the FPS 100, FPS was really working on upping their game, and they developed the XP32 processor. This had a different bit width than the previous FPS 100 and AP120B, but it utilized some really nice chips, notably the AM29116s and the Waytec 1032 and 1033 chips. Also, the XP32 was very laser focused on doing fast Fourier transforms. And so it was able to pull off 18 megaflops of performance. But the trick here is that the XP32 was really thought of as like a co-processor or processor add-on. The control processor, which was often an FPS 100 or AP120B, could have multiple XP32s attached to it, so that you could combine all of their processing power to create something insanely fast. Now, the AP120B could do 12 megaflops, and if you had the right model of AP120B with the correct add-on, you could add up to 3 XP32 processors to it, which would be 12 plus 18 plus 18 plus 18. That's too much. The camera's rolling, I got a microphone on, I'm not gonna be able to do that math. It's simple, I could do it if there wasn't a camera in front of me. I'll just put the text up. That's a lot of megaflops. That's a lot of performance. The only problem with the XP32 is that we don't know of any that survived except for the one that's sitting on that table over there. We know nothing about the XP32 except for some very basic stuff that we've found in a couple of articles. Let me reiterate this because I don't think the full gravity of the situation is coming across here. For the FPS 100, we have a boatload of documentation, including a full set of schematics. We have about 70% of the software suite, and we have multiple brilliant people all around the world working together to bring one of these systems up. And even then, it took months and months and months for us to get our foot in the door even. It took over a year before we could get Cully's system to add 2 numbers together, much less do a Fourier transform. That'll probably take us another 2 years or so. And that's on a system that we have a mountain of resources for. That's how complex the FPS 100 is. But the XP32 processor is a level of complexity well beyond the FPS 100. And we have no documentation, no schematics, no software, and the only one that we know that exists is right here. It's a pretty hopeless situation. Or is it? The XP32 is normally found in the FPS 5000 series, which used an FPS 100 or AP120B as the control processor for the add-on XP32 coprocessors. But this is an FPS 3000, and we can't even find any evidence that this thing should exist, with the exception of a parts list that says FPS 3000 next to it. Other than that, I mean, we've talked to people that worked at FPS, and they didn't even know this thing existed. So this is a really weird one, but this might hold the key to unlocking the XP32, because instead of having an FPS 100 or an AP120B act as the control processor for the XP32 in this box, this thing used the Motorola monoboard microcomputer as the control processor. And this is an off-the-shelf part with a 68K on it that has 2 little ROMs at the top that are full of code. Now, this VersaBus monoboard microcomputer doesn't make this FPS 3000 a standalone system. It is very much so still a coprocessor add-on for a host. That host system is going to be supplying this thing with data for it to do work on, instructions to tell it what kind of work to do on that data, and it's going to be retrieving the results back from it to store ultimately on a disk or display to the user. So this little block diagram is not an official one. I made this up with the best of my understanding of how this system is. And I think what's going on here is the host system communicates via the APIF. And what this is doing is taking the likely 32 bits from the host system, breaking it up into 2 16-bit chunks, and dumping that onto the VersaBus. And this is where that monoboard microcomputer lives, because it can fully arbitrate the data on the VersaBus. It makes the decisions on what data goes where and at what time. And if it deems that some data needs to make it down to the XP32, it sends that through the VersaBus translator and then into the universal formatter. And this is because the host system may not use the same floating point format that the XP32 coprocessor does. So the formatter changes whatever that floating point format is into IEEE 754 32-bit floating point format. And then from here we hit the XP32 bus, and we have 3 main things on this bus. We have the XP32 itself, then we have the memory control, and finally main data. And main data is just the memory card, and this is the system common memory or shared common memory. So this VersaBus monoboard microcomputer is controlling the flow of data throughout the entire FPS 3000. And all of that control is stored on these two tiny little ROMs right up here. And so, of course, the first thing I did months ago was pull those ROMs out and dump them. So we have the code safely backed up. But if we can understand the code, or more importantly, if we can understand how the VersaBus is controlling the data in the system, we might be able to reverse engineer a couple of instructions and get this thing to start doing vector math. But this is still a single board computer, and it has a serial port on it. Are you thinking what I'm thinking? In the VersaBus documentation, the first serial port is on pin 73 and 75, and since the backplane is all this wire wrap insanity, it means that I can take these little like DuPont connectors and just slide them onto the pins. So that's our receive and transmit, but I also need ground. That's going to be over on pin 1, which is all the way on the end here. And now we're hooked into the serial port, but we're not out of the woods yet. This is RS-232, and RS-232 needs plus and minus 12 volts, and I can see lugs for that right here. There's plus 12, and then there's minus 12, and they're directly connected up to a pair of wire wrap pins here, and I can follow the red and black wires from that straight over to the VersaBus single board computer, and so that's absolutely our supply, except that our power supply only supplies 5 volts via these massive bus bars. There is nothing to supply plus and minus 12, so if I want to have proper serial communication, I'm going to have to put a plus and minus 12 volt supply into this thing. Thanks to my good buddy Tishan, I have some extra Meanwell power supplies here, and this Q120D puts out 4 different voltages, plus 24, plus 12, plus 5, and minus 12. Obviously, I only need the plus 12 and minus 12, so all I need to do is just run some wires from it and lock them in place using the lug terminals that are on the backplane there. FPS clearly meant for plus and minus 12 volt to be hooked up to this thing at some point, but maybe once it was set up for delivery, they thought that the customer didn't need to talk to the VersaBus via serial, so they just didn't include the power supply necessary for it. This 5 volt 200 amp power supply is not long for this world, I'm afraid. Getting a faint smell of fish out of it. So it's got a capacitor in there that is losing its mind. And man, I don't want to take the power supply apart right now. So last I checked, which was just like a couple of days ago, it was still putting out stable, clean 5 volts. And the backplane of this thing is not fully populated, so we're not even stressing this thing to half of its capability. So we're just gonna send it, and hopefully it works fine. We'll find out. So I'll go ahead and flip on the main power switch here. That turns on the cooling fan of the power supply, but the main power isn't on. My plus minus 12 volt has come on, so I'll flip the power switch on the front here. Power has come up. It does say power on the front, host interrupt enabled. It's very loud, but, well, as you can see, absolutely nothing coming through the serial port. And that's not too surprising. The serial port on the VersaBus card here is pretty well defined in the documentation, and so we know what that code should look like if it was ever trying to hit those ports. And after disassembling the code on these 2 ROMs up top here, like, we can see that it never once hits the serial port on this thing at all, like nothing. So my best guess is that they had a different set of ROMs on the production floor that they would install into this board. They would hook up a separate plus minus 12 volt supply to it and use that to communicate via serial to do final checkout or debugging or stress testing of the system. And once they were confident that the FPS 3000 was healthy and ready to go, they would pull out their debug ROMs and drop in production ROMs and then send the machine on its way. So as long as we have these 2 production ROMs in here, the only way to actually communicate with the FPS 3000 is via the APIF, or Array Processor Interface, except that we have no idea what kind of host system that APIF is expecting, and we don't even have any idea what the VersaBus is expecting to receive from the host system. So there's no way that we can actually communicate with the FPS 3000. Except that there's still that serial port on here. Like, surely there's something we can do with that. And the ROMs aren't full. I mean, there's some empty space on there. So maybe we can leave all of the original ROM code intact and slip a little something extra into the open space on those ROMs that unlocks the serial port on the VersaBus here. And an absolute legend over on the Discord by the name of Fleto666 thought exactly this. And they got to work developing a memory monitor that fits in the extra space on these ROMs, so I can write those to two new ROMs, swap them in, and potentially start talking to the FPS 3000 for the first time in who knows how many decades. All right, let's give Fleto's ROM monitor a test here. I'm gonna turn the main power switch on. This power supply fan has come on, that power supply has come up, so we got our plus minus 12 volts. So we'll go ahead and hit the main power switch here. That has brought up 5 volts. We have our power light on the front, but nothing out of here. I think I've got maybe my RXTX backwards. Let's swap that right quick. Wouldn't be RS232 if you didn't get the lines backwards at some point. All right. Oh, look at that. It echoed back what I typed. That's already good news. H should be help. Yes. Oh, Fleto, you absolute mad lad. Our prompt says FPS 3K. We're talking to the VersaBus card inside the FPS 3000, and you can see that we have a bunch of options here. I can do an exclamation point, and that gives us a FPS 3000 SBC monitor / debugger. I may have to get him to change that to FPS 3000 monoboard microcomputer monitor or something like that at some point. This is really cool. Okay, so we can view the registers. So if I type R, that's all of the different registers on the 68K, and we can see most of them are empty, but we can view them at least. We can also do standard memory monitor stuff, so I can do like M000, that's starting at address 000, let's dump 16 bytes. And yeah, there we go, that's 16 bytes. I need to remind myself what the keys are here, so I can also do W. So if I do a W 0000 11 space 22 space 33 space 44, and just hit enter on that, and then I do a D 0000 for 16 bytes again. We can see that we got 11 22 33 44 in there. So I can not only view memory in the VersaBus, I can actually also change it, which is very nice here. I can also jump to a specific spot in memory and run, but I don't know what to put in memory to actually run that. We can also load Motorola S records over SIO. No clue what that means. We can set breakpoints. We can single step. We can do, I haven't actually tried this one, live board status plus diagnostics. So let's see what that says. Ooh, that's interesting, but there we go. RAM 128 kilobytes, ROM 64 kilobytes. No clue what the WCS buffer is. No clue what monwork is. The APIF, oh, that's exciting. We can see exactly what memory addresses the arithmetic processor interface is sitting at. Same for the translator. So that's the two paths in and out of the VersaBus here. So that's amazing. We now know how to send stuff. Well, we don't know how to send stuff. We now know the correct memory addresses to hit to send stuff to the XP32 or to send stuff to the APIF. Then we have SIO channel A. I think that's our the serial port that we're talking over. Board status is F70019. No clue what that means. VMod control 1F. No clue what that means. Monitor in GPRO. I don't know. I'm gonna have to take a screenshot of this and send it over to Fleto. But this is absolutely amazing because we're talking to the FPS 3000 for the first time ever. Absolutely incredible work by Fleto there. I'm completely blown away. This is amazing. Now I know that we didn't do much with the memory monitor today, but that's because you guys are getting the most up-to-date information that we have. We didn't get this thing working until last night, and it's already Thursday night. This video has to come out on Sunday, so if I don't sit down and start editing soon, the video is just not gonna come out. But this is unbelievably exciting because now we can start poking and prodding and learning more about the FPS 3000. This really opens the door. Like if you watch my video from 6 months ago where I was talking about the FPS 3000, I essentially said that the project is dead. There's no way to ever actually use this system because we don't have any of the software, we don't have any of the documentation, we got no schematics, we've got nothing. But I think Fleto may have proven me wrong on this one, and I couldn't be more happy about it. Now, of course, there's still a massive number of things that could absolutely kill this project, but I think the only way that we're really going to figure that out is to keep playing with the memory monitor here and start learning more about the system and probing things and maybe even getting the scope on some signals to see that they're doing what we're expecting them to do. Like, this is incredibly exciting. This project went from full dead to only mostly dead, which is partially alive. So that's a massive win in my book. I want to thank you all so much for hanging out with me today, and I hope to see you in the next one.